Nigel Farage has said that he'd like to see a ban on second homes in tourist areas. Nigel Farage has called for second home owners to be banned from purchasing new houses in tourist spots. The Reform UK leader said something has to be done for locals in beauty spots who have been priced out of buying homes, but insisted charging second home owners double council tax was the wrong approach. Mr. Farage said the real solution is the Mevagissey solution, where you build new builds and they are only for sale for genuine local people. That is the way through this. You build exclusively for people who can prove they are genuinely local. That is the solution. Now, this isn't Reform Party policy, so there are no details on this specific idea. But he cited Mevagissey, which is a village in Cornwall, who voted in favour of this policy. Yet, housing developers weren't so keen. While Mevagissey's ban on second home owners had proved popular with many of the 2,500 locals, the policy appears to have turned off housing developers. The Telegraph understands in the 7 years since the policy was introduced, only 6 new builds have been built in the village. Second home owners have also been able to circumvent the rule by purchasing existing properties. To me, this seems that the policy was ineffective because it was weak, and Farage simply wanted headlines rather than to address the housing crisis. Now, it's worth noting that the Green Party passed a motion to ban landlords at their conference, and there is now a real conversation about housing being used as assets. Now, the right-wing think tank Taxpayers Alliance were unsurprisingly against banning second homes. Joanna Marchong of the Taxpayers Alliance said Mr. Farage's policy sounded good on paper, but would stifle growth and drive up prices. She added, restricting who can buy homes doesn't make them more affordable, it just strangles investment and leaves everyone worse off. Instead of copycat bans that punish builders and buyers, ministers should focus on fixing the broken planning system and cutting red tape, and above all, building new homes. Allowing people to hoard housing only then to rent it out is the problem, not red tape, but this is the same old boring line from free market fundamentalists who trot it out every single time. Now, part of the reason house prices are high is because so many are being built to let. If there was a high demand in housing, it doesn't always guarantee that those buying the houses are young couples planning to live in them. Many are being sold to property developers to be rented out for profit. None of these right-wing organisations and think tanks will talk about the need for council housing. Now, in terms of Farage, there is no way in hell he will actually support a policy that favours buyers who want to use housing for living in rather than being used for rent. I mean, Richard Tice is a major property tycoon. Farage himself has properties he rents out. Helena, does this prove that the Greens are winning the argument?
I mean, it certainly is part and parcel of the reality of the current housing market, that the base assumptions of classical liberalism are coming into contact with reality. When Reem Ibrahim was commenting on this policy from Nigel Farage, she said it was almost practically socialist and bonkers. And I'm like, well, what's bonkers is thinking that somehow there aren't real world constraints on commodity production, which is the system that we are currently living in, right? Land is only finite. There are other uses for land other than building housing. Whilst you and me we both favor an increase in construction to try and drive down costs and increase the number of properties available for young couples to buy. If you do not place restrictions on those markets, they will get crowded out by those with the capital to invest. Doesn't matter whether it's Blackstone, doesn't matter whether it's Emirati petrodollars being pumped in to use it as an investment vehicle to increase their overall portfolio and indeed the value of properties more broadly, or if it's a rich couple who live in the City of London who want to stay there 3 months of the year during the off-season. All of these problems of absentee ownership, of treating housing as an investment vehicle, has led to our problem right now where demand is outstripping supply and where demand is fundamentally not being created by migrants, it's not being created by overpopulation or anything like that, as our houses per capita is higher than it's ever been. The problem is that the free market is coming into contact with the reality of housing being treated as a commodity within a market and not indeed being treated for its use value, which is for somebody to live in, that has led to these aberrations where entire towns in areas like the Southwest are empty, are fucking deserted because they're being bought out by rich people from out of town who want to stay there very, very infrequently, rather than being used to actually house people. This is the same dynamic we're seeing in city centres with Airbnb, where people will buy residential housing literally made for couples to live in, for people to raise families and be able to create a sense of community, are staying empty half the time because they're used as a short-term let, a short-term investment vehicle for someone treating housing for profit rather than for its actual use value, which has been houses' use value for the entirety of their existence, which is to live in. This was the situation that we had in this country for all of the years up to Thatcher, where we treated housing for its use value through council housing, which is the Greens' plan to phase out private landlords, whether they be through Airbnb, whether they be medium-term lets in as far as the private rented sector is. You replace that with long-term lets with guaranteed tenancies from local authorities. And this is the way to do it. I don't share a lot of your skepticism over Farage not implementing this policy. Fundamentally, Farage knows that if he's going to win, it's going to be off the back of people in rural constituencies. And despite the fact that I talk a lot, and we've talked a lot about the problems facing young people in the housing market in inner cities where lots of young people live, these aren't confined just to inner cities. And with these rural coastal areas especially, these are pretty sparsely populated areas, but those locals are losing their own kids to flee towards the cities where, first of all, where the jobs are, and second of all, where they can literally find anywhere to rent, anywhere to live, because every single property that exists currently in these rural areas is being bought out by absentee owners using them as holiday purchases. This is a whole problem on every area of the country, and its fundamental basis is the over-commodification of housing. Now, I personally think that the Greens should add, I would propose a conference motion if it was me, which would add much more of a ban in terms of foreign ownership. I know under the policy basis for abolished landlords is about absentee ownership, and it doesn't matter whether that's absentee ownership from the UK or from outside, but it doesn't really matter whether you ban private landlords. The Emirati petrodollars can go as far as they need to increase the value of housing. And the developers need this situation to continue. They need it to be seen as only a crisis of supply and not distribution, so they can maintain the housing value, so they make the most profit off of the land that they currently own. I don't know if you know about the concept called land banking in the audience, but that's where developers will buy out land that is prime to develop houses on, and they won't build because they are waiting for the potential land value to increase as much as possible and for the potential value of the houses that they built to be as high as possible, because their motivation is profit rather than human utility. If, for example, we had a publicly owned developer, which is part of the Greens policy proposal, then we would be able to build on this without having to worry. We'd be able to build houses for local people, to sell to local people immediately upon Homes England being utilised as a public sector developer, and a lot of these problems would go away. But of course, the state doing literally anything is communism, according to people like Green Ibrahim, and doubtless according to Farage too. So Farage's solution here is very paper thin, it's only papering over the cracks, rather than a wholesale rejection of the market framework, which is what the Greens are proposing.
The Taxpayers Alliance, right, they claim that banning second properties will increase the cost of housing. I wanted to get your response to that.
That comment from the Taxpayers Alliance is absolutely ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous because fundamentally, just like any market, price is set by supply and demand. If you keep the supply basically fixed, which is what is happening when developers aren't building enough in these specific areas because they're concentrating on inner cities, then the only thing that will control housing prices is the demand, which is being increased by more people wanting it for different use purposes, right? There is a competition currently between landlords, absentee owners, people who want to buy the houses to live in them, and those who are using it for holiday lets. If you make it so that only one of those groups is now looking to live there, that is only one of those four groups demanding access to those properties. Therefore, demand will fall and prices will fall. This is basic market economics. I don't know why these proposed free market capitalists, these classical liberals, fundamentally are misunderstanding a basis of market economics, which I was told was a silly socialist. I just didn't understand. But as always, it does seem to be the most capitalist or the most pro-capitalist among interest groups who seem to fundamentally misunderstand the basis of capitalism.